Danielle, I'm so excited to have you here. I say this about all the guests, but I do mean this. Like, I'm very genuinely excited to have you here to talk about a conversation that I think is near and dear to the heart of Black women as to who we are, which is friendship. But before we get into that, because I want to just like jump in, let me take a pause. How are you doing? Welcome.
I'm so glad to be here, and I am doing well. I'm doing well. I feel at rest. I've gradually started to release the whole like hustle culture mindset, and
Yes.
I'm just like settling into just like being present, and it feels good.
Yes. Join us. Join us. Let go of that hustle culture,
Yes.
girl. Join us on the other side. I'm here for that. I'm on the same journey. So I'm always looking for companions to take with me. And
hmm
that kind of brings us to what we're here to talk about today, which is friendship and your amazing book, Fighting for Our Friendship, and just the concept of that. Here at this podcast, we talk a lot about the true legacy inheritance of Black women. And one of those things is joy, but part of that's community. So
hmm
I want to dig into community, but I want to first start with acknowledging that there might be some challenges or some barriers that Black women might face when it comes to building and maintaining friendships. And so how do we overcome some of those challenges, or what are some of those challenges that you've observed in your work around this topic?
Yeah, there are a couple that emerged specifically for this group, for our group. One that I've noticed is a lot of us are high achievers. Okay, we can attribute that
Yes.
to a lot of things culturally that have made us overfunction. But as high achievers, I've noticed that these women are they're goal crushers. They're on. We're focused at work. We're doing all the things, and a lot of our identity rests in that. The danger here lies in, can you show up vulnerably in a friendship? Can you say, hey, I need support, which is a part of a friendship? A lot of us, we pride ourselves on being the strong friend. We say that to one another, right? And then we'll say, but I feel like I don't have anybody to just fall apart in front of. Well, have you ever allowed yourself to do that? Have you ever given them the opportunity? Do you have, being a high achiever so deeply rooted in your identity that your self-sufficiency is who you are? And so allowing friends to show up for you, support you, it feels like it takes away from who you are to fall apart in that way. But we all know that vulnerability is such an important part of friendship. But for many of us, we feel like we aren't able to do that and show weakness in that way. So that's something that I've noticed kind of culturally as a unique challenge for our group. I also know that some of us were parentified from a young age. So we're doing all the things for all the people, and in such a role of leader or captain or problem solver, that in a friendship where you're brought in to be a peer, it's a peer-to-peer relationship. There are no power dynamics. So we don't need friends that we can lead and tell them what to do. We're right alongside them. And so getting comfortable being in a space where we are our peers, and I'm not captaining this ship and leading us. I'm just here as your girl. I'm your friend. I'm your equal. Is something interesting that I've noticed as well. And these are probably like the two main things I've noticed for Black women as unique challenges: is sometimes showing up vulnerably and knowing that it's not going to detract from who you are or make you weak. But, and there are beautiful things too of being Black women. Sometimes we've got this shared language. We have an immediate sense of ease and shared experience. So I think it always is interesting to look into the unique things, the unique ways that we enjoy friendship with one another.
I love this answer. I'm so excited right now because I'm just like, yes, there's so many different places I want to go. And like, for you all to know, I like sat down with Danielle. It's like, we're going to go here in this order. Now I'm like, I want to throw it all out the window and just dive in on these two answers, because I think there's so much to uncover here. One is you highlighted beautifully this parentified. Most of us are parentified at a very young age. We experience the world as a parent. And so we are navigating relationships, both platonic and not, one would argue, in a parental role. Like, we don't even know we're doing it. So that's one bucket over
Mm-hmm.
here. And then on the other side over here is this identity and overachievement. And you cannot overachieve in friendship, right? Like, we're setting these goals for ourselves that are not compatible with vulnerability. And so I want to kind of ask around that is, we'll start with vulnerability and then we'll move to parentified relationships that we have. With vulnerability, what kinds of things are you seeing? Like, what behaviors does that look like? So people can go, oh, that might be me.
Mm-hmm.
And then ultimately, how do we shift that? Like, how do we start to try, like, what's a mindset shift that we need to get into to be able to be vulnerable with folks?
Yeah, that's a terrific question. I think for a lot of us, myself included a while ago, when we even hear the word vulnerable, we conjure up images of people crying and talking about their trauma. And we're like, I'm not doing all that. Okay.
Yeah.
And the best way I've heard it defined is you're taking a risk of rejection. But the main thing here that really hits home for me is that looks different for different people. What feels risky to you may not for me. I'm comfortable with that. So what actually feels like a risk for you, and not, I'm being vulnerable because I'm talking about my feelings. So some people love talking about their feelings. They're comfortable crying in front of others. They're comfortable talking about their addiction and trauma at 15. So I would even argue that that's not necessarily vulnerability for them. Some people just like to talk about those things. So for you, what feels like an actual risk for you? Meaning, if I say or do this thing, my friends might see me differently. If I say or do this thing, it might cost me the friendship. But you know what? I'm going to go for it. That is vulnerability. So this can look like, being in a friend group and having an opinion that is different from everyone's. Like, it's a totally different worldview and it's not going to be popular. But saying, you know what? I'm just going to say it. And I know they're going to probably look at me differently, but I'm going to go for it. That's vulnerability. It could be clicking with a woman at work and being like, man, she is so cool. And then mustering the courage to say, would you want to grab lunch sometime? That feels risky for you. She might not be interested. So those things that feel like this might cost me my very put together appearance. This might cost me a friend looking at me favorably. This might cost my comfort. That would qualify as vulnerability. So getting in touch with what that looks like for you and taking actual risk instead of the things that look like a risk on the outside, right? You shared that really brave thing about your divorce. You like talking about your divorce. Okay. Right. You know what I'm saying? That's not vulnerable, right? So what does it really look like? And then getting curious around, why do I feel such a pressure to maintain an appearance of strength? I mean, that's exhausting at some point. And also the tricky thing there too, or the beautiful thing about that is it's risky because there's a possibility of rejection on the other side, but it also will help you to fast track the process of finding your people. Because for a lot of us, I don't want to be vulnerable because what if I look this way? But if I allow myself to be vulnerable, I might get more closely connected to women who accept me, or they say, wow, Danielle, that humanized you to me. I went through that too. And now we're closer because I took that risk. That lies on the other side too. And so it's just something we have to be comfortable with. And I just think for women, or for those who are listening, think through what actually feels risky to you. Boundary setting with a friend, pursuing a woman who seems interesting to you. What feels risky, what makes you want to cringe, it's probably right there.
Brilliant again. And part of it is because, what I love about this is you're giving people permission to take micro risks, mini risks, right? You're not saying, maybe like for me, for example, talking about my feelings is more challenging, right? But I might be brave enough to give a pop culture hot take that people might be looking at me like, are you okay? Or Kelley, are you okay? Are you sure? I might be brave enough to say, okay, I'm going to give a hot take here and see how y'all feel and work through it, right? They might be like, girl, are you okay? And yes, I am. Yes, I am. I'm standing with that hot take. And then you can laugh and move on, right? But you've taken that mini risk. You're not going to break up on a friendship about, a hot take, right? But you've taken a mini risk to push some boundaries and to demonstrate some vulnerability and to give people an opportunity to process, show up, all those things. So I really, really love that. And I also really love that people go straight to extremes with vulnerability and they think it's one kind of vulnerable. Like it's the crying, it's the falling down on the ground. It's like, I showed up at your doorstep at 2 a.m. I need you to hold me. Kind of the world is ending. And some people are just like, maybe that's what I do on a Tuesday. I got one friend who I love dearly. She's like, Kelley, you call me emo. We'll work through it. I shouldn't call her emo, but I do. And she's like, I'm the emo of us two, right? And so for her, she's like, I'm crying right now. I'm feeling very emotional. I'm very grateful to you. That's not hard for her at this point in her life. That's not a vulnerability. But for me, that would be. And so I love the way you broadened what vulnerability is and what it isn't, so that people can really do some personal work, right? Because that's what helps the friendship, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And those are two great examples that you gave of either those of us saying, "Oh, I do vulnerability really well. I love being vulnerable." I'm like, I don't know that people love being vulnerable. It's inherently risky. So I love your examples with the emo friends and the, because it does look different for all of us. And I found looks different according to different audiences. Because I've noticed with some friends, okay, I feel safer to do this here with her. It feels less risky. But with this friend who I know to be especially, critical, it feels like a bigger risk to do this here. And so maybe now we're drifting into something else entirely, because if I realize with certain friends, I don't ever feel safe taking risks, I think that, that now reveals something else.
Yes, I absolutely agree with that. And I think that, that really beautifully ties into the parental piece that I wanted to get into as we go into our next, continuing the conversation with you in our next section of conversation, is that I really like the idea. There's a connection here, like vulnerability and being a parent. It's a one-way ticket. Like if you're really being a good parent, you are not overly vulnerable. You're not coming to your 4-year-old and telling them, comfort mom because she's had the worst day ever. That's your job, right? Mm-hmm. Like you understand that parenting means it's a little more, the imbalance is there. It's like it's an expectation that you give, don't take as much, that you keep the relationship out of balance. And so some of us have been in that role for so long that vulnerability feels like it is unfair. It feels very uncomfortable because we have created dynamics with the people in our life. And you mentioned that when you said, some people you're going to feel more comfortable with, your pop culture hot takes. Mm-hmm. And some folks you're going to be like, I'm crying because I'm really sad and I need you to be there for me. Like not everyone fits that. And so when we come back, I want to talk more about that. I want to talk about how do we then make sure we got the right friends in our lives? How do we cultivate intimacy in our friendship, like real intimacy? And then conversely, like you started hinting at, if some folks don't feel like they're fitting where they're supposed to be, how do we adjust them with grace, right? How do we adjust that relationship? So more to come with Danielle. We are just getting started, and we're going to jump into this when we come back.